Hello? Hi, Barry. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on. I can't hear you. Should I sign in again?
Okay, so I
Hello?
disconnected by
Oh, I
phone.
can hear you now. Oh,
Yeah,
I can hear you now.
for some reason the audio is not working on this computer, and tell me what the sound quality is like. It is coming through my speakerphone, but I don't. I'm just trying to kind of make it work with this computer because the other computer I'm trying to fix. But you can hear me, okay?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, so great. So we'll start. And you can see everything okay. Okay, great. So okay, so let's just start. We'll just start with some chanting. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha. Vakrutunda Mahakaya, Surya Koti Samapraha, Nirvidyam Karame Deva, Sarvakareshu Sarvada. Jnanamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Padam, Mantramulam Guru Vakyam, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvinavatitam Ma Vivishai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Om Doom Durgaye Namaha. Om Doom Durgaye Namaha. Om Doom Durgaye Namaha. Om Rahave Namaha. Om Rahave Namaha. Om Rahave Namaha. Om Ketave Namaha. Om Ketave Namaha. Om Ketave Namaha. Om Aditaye Samaye Mangalai Buddhaye Cha Guru Shukra Shani Vischa Rahave Ketave Namaha. Honoring the great ones, Lord Krishna, Goddess Saraswati, Veda Vyasa, cognizer of the Vedas, and the holy tradition of masters, going back to Brahmananda Saraswati, and my great teachers. We don't have a big crowd today. We've got, well, people sometimes do come late. We've got Catherine here. We've got Jessica here. And I'm not sure, I guess sometimes people have been coming a little bit late lately. So Jessica, you can hear me okay, right?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm wondering if this would work with my headset, but I'm just going to keep. It's working with the phone, so I'm just going to keep it working with the phone. Okay. Okay, so So I want to say a couple things about where we are with the course, and I did send you an email. Originally, when I was going to do one lesson on nakshatras in the part one of the course, I said, well, I really can't do justice to it. Really need 3 or 4 lessons on nakshatras. So then I developed the extension, and then the extension was 6 or 7 weeks, and I covered nakshatras in 4 weeks, and a lot of the rest of the nakshatra material can get kind of like cookbooky, so it's kind of like you could probably read stuff on it. So I wanted to do something deeper. with the material, because it's ultimately Rahu and Ketu are about our subconscious patterns, and we have to kind of really work hard to kind of use the astrology to help unmask them. So I'm trying to, the last 3 lessons I decided to kind of do a lot of extrapolated synthesis material, which is going to be very deep, that nobody will give you. It's taking a lot of time to kind of pull it together. But so that's why we're not going to do any more with nakshatras other than integrating it into the final lesson. And I'm hoping people are okay with that. But I will send some more, for those of you who are not here today, I will send some more nakshatra material that I have in writing for you to study. And I sent you some other links if you want to study Rahu and the nakshatras. Next week, I'm thinking of doing Rahu and Ketu in relationship, because it's such kind of a huge area, and something that wasn't in the original course, and then pulling everything together the following week on April 10th. Again, those of you who have signed up for my Finding Your Life Purpose course, Clear in Depth, I will be having the first lesson will be today at 3:30 Central Time. Most of you on the call have signed up. If you haven't, there's all kinds of links on my Facebook site, and I sent you it in my email. The first class is always like the ocean in a drop, so it's very powerful because it's an overview of everything that we're going to do. And those of you who are interested in the foundations class, again, it's going to be, really incredible depth. It's for people who know astrology will get, really kind of in-depth stuff that they've never learned before. Okay, so that's all I want to say here. I want to move to today's material. And there's a second edition of the slideshow that I'll send you. So I always suggest that you wait to print the material off when I send you the black and white version. Okay, so what I've added, I've just added a couple new slides. I keep, inevitably there's always some type. This is the big slide that I've added to the second edition of the slideshow, and we have to talk about it first. So Rahu and Ketu create wounds and masks in many ways in our charts. And again, Rahu and Ketu are connected to subconscious patterns, and we don't see them. They're kind of the shadows of the moon, and they're hidden. And that's why we can go through our whole life and not understand why things don't work unless we understand Rahu and Ketu. So that's kind of the core assumption here. If you study with me, you'll see that we have to look at charts in many different ways. We can't just look at the natal chart. And so Rahu and Ketu wounds and masks can show up in many different charts. It can show up in the moon chart, which is taking the moon as the ascendant. It can show up in the sun chart, taking the sun as ascendant. It could show up in a Varga chart. I mentioned that earlier in the class. If you have Rahu and Ketu on the 1-7 axis or conjunct the first house lord, it could show up, obviously in the natal chart, which we've been focusing on. It can show up in a dasha chart. Now, a dasha chart is that when you go into a dasha period, you have to rotate the whole chart around the dasha lord. So obviously, if you go into a Rahu or Ketu dasha, Rahu and Ketu are on the 1-7 axis. So, but sometimes if you go into dasha period, Rahu and Ketu may end up on the 2-8 axis. Now, in researching this material about wounds, and I was noting that the wounds actually have a lot to do with childhood and parents and stuff like that. So they can second house is early childhood and family. So I feel like a lot of these wounds show up most when you have Rahu and Ketu on the 1-7 axis or the 2-8 axis, or even sometimes the 6-12 axis. So it's very kind of these patterns are kind of so deep and they're so prevalent in so many of us that they have to be in many different places, and that's why I was putting this together. Again, no one will tell you this. It's something I've just been kind of putting together from research, and we'll look at some examples. Okay, so again, just kind of to review, K2 houses are associated with the past in a place where we spin our wheels and never feel happy or accomplished. And our first part of our life is dominated by Ketu, where we're stuck with family beliefs and family patterns and inherited family ancestral karma. We always have to venture into Rahu. And because Rahu and Ketu are kind of unconscious patterns, we never really see them. Ketu will bring, this is kind of a core slide here, and I should blow it up, but it's not. I don't know how well you're seeing it. Let's see. Okay, so Ketu will bring with it its wounds from the past, this life or the last, which often include betrayal, abandonment, injustice, humiliation, and rejection. Treason is probably not really one of them. It's not included in our show. Rahu, again, they tend to show up on the 1, 7, 2, 8, 6, 12 axis mostly. But again, if they're connected to the moon chart, it will be good. And obviously, Saturn, moon is childhood. And so when Saturn afflicts the moon, it also kind of predisposes to a lot of wounds also. So moon conjunct Saturn, moon opposing Saturn, moon and Saturn signs, moon and Saturn's nakshatras, moon conjunct Saturn in the D9 chart, all of those could kind of create predispositions for wounds. So the bottom line is that all these patterns kind of show up in multiple ways, and we shouldn't get stuck in just looking in one place for them. So Rahu kind of represents our false ego that we cover up these wounds with unless we bring them to the surface to heal. And until we do that, we're never whole and complete. And again, sometimes it's through Rahu and Ketu transits and dashas that these triggers come up. So particularly when you have Rahu and Ketu going through the first, second, and seventh and eighth houses, they're going to tend to kind of bring up a lot of stuff to heal and transit. And then if you go into a Rahu Ketu dasha, that you're kind of, you automatically puts Rahu or Ketu in the first house, and so it's immediately kind of bringing up this time for healing. So moving into Rahu Terry often means uncovering and healing these unconscious wounds. If we stay in the Ketu house, we stay protected and we don't discover who we are. And it's scary to unmask our wounds, and it's kind of a huge thing. And so Rahu and Ketu kind of cause a crisis between age 36 and 45 in order that we can heal our wounds. And sometimes, it can be anywhere between 41 to 42 to 43, but sometimes it can extend, overlap a little bit more. And by Ketu time, we have to have healed our wounds and be happy with who we are. Otherwise, we kind of take a lot of weird energy into our old age. So, very kind of key. So I'll tell you my story at 42. I think I told you my story. There's part of it I didn't tell. I was thinking about it and putting together this lesson. At 42 was a big momentous year for me. I got married. I moved from the Ketu ashram to Sedona. But during that year, I had these two major vendors that I was working with, Farm Data and DTN. I wrote financial reports for 700 farmers, and those two companies merged. And I had a really good contract with the Farm Data contract, and it was very profitable, and I was making lots of money. And DTN bought the other company, and they tried to force me to do a bunch of back pay, even though it wasn't really kind of a legal situation. And I was kind of a naive person, and the person who was in charge of this was just not a nice person, and I kind of couldn't believe they were doing this. And eventually they were going to kind of kick me off the network, and it was really hundreds of thousands of dollars if I didn't, comply. And so I decided not to legally fight them, because it was just too kind of, anytime you deal with lawyers and things like that, you kind of end up, just spending tens of thousands of dollars. You never know what's going to happen. And I ended up paying them like $15,000 of what they, which was not rightly just, but it's what they wanted. And then they took over, all these other customers, and I lost about $150,000. And it was a pretty devastating situation for me at the time. It was, I was, and it happened during my Moon Saturn period, but it happened kind of at this, kind of Rahu time window of ripening, and it was one of the bigger crises I had in my entire life. And so at the time, it was trying to decide, well, do I continue with my business? Do I absorb this huge amount of money that I lost and, move forward? And, it was really kind of, disenergizing. Now, I don't know. I'm trying to think, because I was really, putting this together, I was thinking, to me it was kind of a situation of injustice, they were just really kind of unfairly kind of imposing this horrible new contract on me. And I didn't fight it, which was, I suppose that was Rahu not going into the forest and attacking the demons. And I don't know, I mean, my business did recover, but it actually took many years, to kind of deal with this huge debt that they forced on me. And I kind of wonder if I never really healed it on some level, because in some ways it was kind of this victim energy. They did that to me, and they ruined this incredible business that I had, and I lost all this money. And it was kind of, it's kind of this whole, Rahu victim thing, kind of that we see in the 8th house sometimes, or, part of a lot of these patterns that we're talking about. So the point is that a lot of people, if you do charts, if you look back at your own time windows, some of you are older, some of you have this to look forward to. Some stuff happens. You may feel victimized. Your boss may fire you for the wrong reason. Your wife may dump you. Your children may start hating you. I mean, there's something that will happen at the Rahu maturation that will force you to kind of look at some part of you that you don't want to look at. And if you don't look at it, if you don't move forward with it, then it impacts you for a long time, or maybe, the rest of your life if you don't heal. Sometimes people retreat from battle. I suppose I kind of retreated from battle here at age, when I didn't go to court with these people, and I'm not sure what would have happened if I would have. I really felt I made the right decision about it, but then I'm, in this kind of long aftermath of just wondering, well, has it really affected me in long term? And I think it has. And I was only kind of thinking about it when I was putting together this lesson. So that's kind of this whole kind of Rahu thing that kind of happens at age 42. Julie, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, great. We're on my speakerphone because I'm not getting sound through this computer still, and I can't change to the other computer because it's having a problem. So I'm happy to be on this computer. It's just I've got to do the webinar over the phone. So Rahu will cause us to create a mask and a false identity, and we need to shed it, but are we willing, or do we kind of hold on to it? And so it's kind of, I was saying with maturation here, the quest comes, let's say our wife wants to divorce us at age 42 or something. Do we look at our ugly patterns and decide, do we kind of pretend that there's nothing wrong with us and it's all her fault and be a victim, or do we look at our subconscious patterns and realize, God, I really did a terrible job in this marriage. I'm really guilty of not showing up, and I really could have done a better job. So, what happens is, we're kind of blinded up to a certain age, and we have to kind of then look at ourselves and our patterns and then kind of move through our kind of crisis. And, it can show up, depending on what house and sign Rahu is in, and, it can show up in different ways. So, we learned earlier in the class that Rahu can represent an inflated ego, and Ketu is kind of an insecure ego. I'll be right back. I just need to get my jacket. Okay, so Rahu often kind of represents an inflated ego, and Ketu an insecure ego, and they're two sides of the same coin. I mean, we compensate for not feeling good inside by kind of being boastfully projecting a false mask on the outside. And people with big egos often have a repressed and potent deep insecurity. And you see this all the time. With rock stars, sometimes they're everybody idolizes and loves them, and they deep inside, they may have Rahu in the first. Deep inside, and they may be very creative people, but deep inside they think they're not good enough, and they get into drugs and alcohol and to kind of deal with it. I think we saw Phil, you saw the Elton John movie, and I think I showed you his chart a couple of weeks ago. I think he's one of those personalities like that. I think. Now, earlier in the class, we talked about Rahu and Ketu and phoniness, and I thought it was important to bring back these points here because they're going to mean more now. So Rahu often represents phoniness, false identity, masking of patterns that we don't want people to see about us. We need to tell the truth about our deepest fears, and then we are free. But most people are not able to take off the mask. We go to parties at big societal parties, and people wear all these expensive clothes and tell you about their Jaguars, and then you find out they're going bankrupt. So you kind of there's a lot. Rahu can be very phony, and we like authentic people. We don't like people who have these masks, and so ultimately, we said in the healing part of the course that Rahu has to learn how to be authentic and confess to what it's phony about. And it takes a lot of dissolving of ego to do that. But so Rahu kind of jams up our whole system with compensation patterns about who we are and who we aren't. I think we looked at Cher's chart last time. And let's see, I think she's Gemini rising. Let's see if I can still have it. Still having trouble with this date. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have her chart up again. I'm sorry. But anyway, we looked at her chart, and I think she had Ketu in the first, if I remember, in Gemini, and it was kind of like she's done so many plastic, surgeries because I'm not good enough. I'm not beautiful enough. I'm, that kind of energy that kind of comes up, which just creates this false mask. If I have another plastic surgery, maybe I'll love myself more. Well, you better start loving yourself more before you spend all that money on plastic surgery. So phoniness can kind of show up in different ways, just to kind of review what we did earlier in the class. Rahu in the first creates kind of a false self, confused as to who they are, and they project all kinds of false personas. So when you meet people with Rahu in the first, they're very charismatic, and you gravitate toward them. You just everybody loves them, and at the same time, deep inside, if you talk to them deeply, sometimes they don't know who they are. They're very confused because don't forget Rahu in the first creates confusion. My office manager who left, has Rahu in the first in Gemini, and Rahu's transiting Gemini, and he's having this huge kind of Rahu return crisis, and he has no idea who he is or what he wants to do, and it's an absolute crisis for him at the moment, and it's and people love him, and they gravitate toward him, but inside he's kind of dealing with kind of this crisis. Rahu in the second, which I have, I mentioned, has a false family appearance of pretending to manage money but not having no idea how to do this. I mentioned that my early life, I somehow got all these credit cards, and I had this huge amount of money and credit card debt that I accumulated because I wasn't very good at, really learning how to manage money. And then obviously, as I got older, I learned how to do that, and I learned how to manage money. And I kind of took up the Rahu challenge to learn more about money. But I mean, I had to go through many painful lessons around that. Because Rahu is just kind of an experience about that at me, and people thought I had all this money, and I kind of was making lots and lots of money, but I never could hold on to it, which is Rahu in the second. And what I've learned now, Rahu is the second house, is the house of family also, and in teaching this class, I've just kind of realized I don't have much family. Most of my family was killed in the Holocaust. My family was very estranged from whoever was left. When I was growing up, I really had one uncle and two cousins that I saw regularly, and somehow I have no children now, and somehow I have no idea what family is. The family that I have left, I don't want to be part of. And I'm just realizing in healing my Rahu Ketu axis, I have to kind of embrace my family as they are, and even though they're not part of me, and it's just something, because family is so, and I meet people whose family is everything, and I don't understand what that's about, but it's a core issue that needs to be healed still, even at this late in life. Rahu in the third is kind of intellectually restless and not feeling smart enough, so he tries too hard to succeed. So, the third house is about willpower. It has a lot to do with entrepreneurs, and I think we talked about how Rahu, maybe too intense in the third house there in that way, and just create all kinds of problems. Particularly, or it may have, Rahu may pretend to have really good relationships with his siblings, but deep down they all hate each other, and there's no connection. Rahu in the fourth, fourth house is a very emotional house, connected to the heart and the emotions, and to the natural sign of Cancer, and so there's this false feeling in one's heart about what people really feel and what they express. And so when you have Rahu in the fourth, you have to kind of be authentic about telling people what's really going on with you, telling your spouse what's really going on with you, telling your friends and family what's really going on you. Typical Rahu in the fourth. Oh, everything's fine. I feel wonderful. And no one believes you. But the hardest thing in the world is to be genuine and authentic about how you feel with Rahu in the fourth. Rahu in the fifth, projecting who you are in hobbies and sports and romances in a false way. Problems with meditations and spiritual initiation. So somehow Rahu in the fifth always has trouble learning how to meditate, or gets too rebellious to kind of settle down and get into meditation and go through spiritual initiations, or may pretend to be so great in sports and romance, but it's all kind of phony. Rahu in the sixth, may create people who are kind of hypochondriacs. Again, the sixth house is a health house, and again, if you're not disciplined about your health in the sixth house, you get sick because you're not taking care of yourself. And Rahu is too much of a kind of a rebel to really want to be disciplined in the sixth house. It just wants to kind of eat what it wants and just do what it wants. And then Rahu in the sixth often has trouble with coworkers. Sixth house is often a house of people that you work with, and you may get people kind of attacking you a lot because you may come across as a victim because you show up as a phony person at work, and when you're not authentic at work, people kind of hate you and they want to get rid of you. You may pretend to be, you've probably seen this in office situations where somebody kind of sucks up to the boss and tries to be this kind of phony person at work, that they're doing the job, and their coworkers see that they're just like, taking taking their credit, and they eventually leads to this whole kind of problem at work. Rahu in the seventh, false relationships, again, Rahu in the 7th, you're attracted to being in a relationship to kind of balance out, your lack of self identity and not feeling good about yourself. But people often get sexually out of control here. They become a pleaser. They get involved in secret affairs and things like that because there's just never enough relationship for them, and they move on from one relationship to the next, and they're not genuine in relationships, so they're not authentic, and they keep losing their partners. Rahu in the 8th, false trust and getting security from others' resources, like one's partner. Sometimes, 8th house is the house of other people's money, and so, as I mentioned earlier in the class, sometimes if in marriage, if you don't have a strong connection around joint finances and being responsible together in joint finances, then you end up, getting into this tug of war with, one partner's pulling the weight more than another in joint finance. And the other problem with Rahu in the 8th is that, it's one of those unconscious 4th, 8th, and 12th house are water, are natural water signs of the zodiac. And so 8th house is like Scorpio, deep in conscious spheres. So Rahu in the 8th is like Rahu in Scorpio. It's just that we can't deal with these unconscious fears and phobias, and we end up drowning in addictive patterns. And we just are kind of, we're not there. Rahu in the 8th is particularly difficult because it creates abusers and people who are abused and victims and perpetrators. And there's this whole inner shyness, lack of confidence that may overcompensate with a false mask. Rahu in the 9th, false about religion and spirituality, but possibly excessive, like a fundamentalist Christian who's, just thumping his Bible and going door to door. So there's just kind of and they may not be genuine. I mean, if you really, sometimes you meet these people, and rarely they'll take off their mask if they're a fundamentalist Christian or religious zealot. And if you do, you often find out, they don't really believe in it, but they like being part of the group, So they want to blend in with spiritual groups, but they're really not into it, So there's kind of this falseness and phoniness that they have. Rahu in the 10th, charismatic in leadership, but does not want to work well or lead others. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about the last couple of weeks. Rahu in the 10th, 10th house is the house of taking command, and it's the sun, it's Leo, it's taking command at work and leading others through example. A good leader leads through getting in the trenches with the people that he's working with. He doesn't criticize them and stay aloof and not do anything. So Rahu in the 10th may promote people to leadership, but then they get taken down because they don't know how to be a leader, and they need to study leadership. Rahu in the 11th can create phoniness with groups and friends, or one has phony and authentic friends, unclear of long-term goals of what they want to do. There's just, I always say that Rahu in the 11th is good, but again, Rahu still is going to have some, be part of these groups or cults or things like that, but really not authentic, and not an authentic person. And then Rahu in the 12th is a real problem. False abilities to surrender and to sacrifice in marriage. Again, the 12th house is one of the marriage houses. It's about being able to sacrifice. And if you have Rahu in the 12th, you get into phony sex lives and affairs and secret sex lives because you can't sacrifice in marriage, and you get bored, and Rahu always wants to kind of try something new. So you get these kind of deep secrets in life with Rahu in the 12th, and it hides business failures and deep insecurities and things like that, unethical activity. So really kind of problems with Rahu in the 12th. Okay. So again, with the mask, we have to kind of become aware of our mask and to look at it and to take it off. And there's this kind of unmasking crisis that can happen between age 41 and 43. And we have to take, that plunge and change. I mean, one of the things, I see when I look back at age 42, I kind of failed. I ended up, instead of going into this lawsuit, I borrowed all this money to kind of take care of this problem, but then I ended up with all this debt, which, did not go away easily. And so in a sense, I didn't have a reality check about how to kind of deal with this problem. I just, I kind of I did a Rahu in the second thing, which was, not managing money properly or reorganizing finances or getting new investors or something like that. I really tried to do it all myself, and I think that wound never quite healed. Okay, so that's the end of this section, which is a little bit of a review, but I think it's going to make a little bit more sense now. I was going to try to pull up some charts for you to look at. I'll just pull up a few just so that we don't get too abstract. Okay, here's John Lennon. John Lennon has Ketu in the first in Pisces and Rahu in the seventh. And obviously, there's a lot of wonderful things in this chart, but I brought it up because Ketu in the first, is not feel really good about oneself, and that's often connected to family. And so if you read the biography of John Lennon, his father was in the war when he was growing up, and and then when his father came back, his father wanted to take take custody of the child because the family got a divorce. Maybe he was age 6 or 7 or something like that. And they asked John who he wanted to be with, and he said he wanted to be with his father, and he said it twice. And then the mother walked away, and then he cried and he ran to her. So he had this really kind of difficult failure with his parents, and you get that debilitated Saturn in the second here. Just deep suffering around family, and he obviously he rose to great stardom and became this great man, but inside you could see that people never quite heal these kind of Ketu things. Now I'm trying to remember what year he died. Did he die during his what year was he shot? Was he shot around 42 or something? I'm just wondering. Anybody remember? Was it 1980? Anybody remembered or can look it up real quickly? I'm just curious because I'm just wondering if he kind of I know he died, but I just had it up for Wikipedia, but if I pull it up again, I don't want to mess up, get too much stuff on the internet. Okay, so I'm just curious if he kind of died around his kind of Rahu crisis period, and you can kind of see Rahu conjunct Mars here.
He died 1980.
It was 1980.
Yeah,
so
December 8th.
He died at 8. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. That's what I was remembering. And so that was kind of in this kind of Rahu ripening years, 40, 41, 42, right between then. But that's interesting. I just was wondering that because, I mean, even somebody who was kind of tragically killed, has to attract something if they don't feel good enough inside about themselves, And, even, these famous rock stars, you get this all the time where they, there's some, and we only see their outward experience. We don't always know what they're going through inside, but you can imagine that, we saw that even in the Elton John movie too, that people don't it takes a lot to kind of heal these, Elton John did heal his addiction and his crisis, and, he did go on to marry and have children. And, to me, that was like an example of moving through the Rahu crisis. I did have his chart up before, but I'm missing it now. But thank you for looking that up, Jessica. Okay. The other person, I want to bring up Jackie Onassis, who actually also had a difficult childhood. Again, she's got Ketu in the first here in Libra, which doesn't do well. Her father was an alcoholic and had affairs, and her parents split, I think, when she was age 7 or 8. And obviously we all look up to her as this incredible person. Very tragic life, obviously. Her family life was certainly not anything model, even though she had wealthy parents. But very kind of wounded soul, and people with Ketu in the first, they kind of retreat, because they don't know, they almost think they did something wrong when their parents get divorced at that kind of young an age. So it's kind of an interesting chart. Okay, let me move on. Any questions on anything? I just wanted to kind of review this thing about masks and unmasking, because I think it's really kind of core to kind of recognizing what your mask is and being willing to go out and unmask yourself, which just about nobody can do, because we think so much of what other people think, but we suffer inside if we're not authentic.
Hi Barry, can this happen a little earlier, or is it like 41 to 40?
Well, it can happen, it certainly could happen during a Rahu transit or a Rahu period. So, I was trying to point that out at the beginning of the class, is that sometimes, Rahu transiting your first and second houses can trigger, a crisis. Rahu transiting, Ketu transiting your first and second houses can trigger a crisis. And that, that starts at, so that happens for everybody at different times. And then it also can happen around your moon, if it goes over your moon. So, and then, Rahu dashas and subperiods come up all the time too. If you have a Rahu major period, then Rahu goes to the first house. We rotate the chart around Rahu. So it's immediately kind of bringing up this whole issue of who am I, and confusion and mask, and, what's my identity, and what do I want to become, and things like that. If you have it in the natal chart, then it's kind of always there, and the point is that, are people ever willing to take off their mask unless they have some crisis that forces them to do it? And you just don't know. You don't know with people. You don't know if they're going to rise up to the occasion. You have to give people a chance, but I feel like people don't. If you read Joseph Campbell's the Hero with a Thousand Faces, he talks about the quest archetype, and the hero, like we said, is goes off and leaves his familiar territory and goes off to kind of, recover the Holy Grail or to slay the dragons or something like that. And once in a while, the hero just, is told that he has to go out, and he says, he goes out a little bit, something bad happens, he comes back and he retreats, So it's called like the failed quest, and that's kind of like the failed Rahu initiation. You don't get what you needed to do. You didn't have enough guidance, and so you kind of, and I live in a community where people probably have a failed. I live in a kind of an ashram community here, and I'm a kind of an ashram personality myself, which is very Ketu. And there are a lot of people that just kind of came back to the ashram because it's safe. They can meditate all the time. They don't have to grow through their challenges, and they think it's fine. It is and it isn't. I left the ashram at age 42. And I came back, so I'm trying to decide if that was a failure or not. I don't know.
So is the Rahu Dasha 2 years? Would you say the Rahu Ketu period is the point where things can turn around? Like, is there a point that which period during these 18 years can be the period that things turn around and you start to realize, get the clarity?
Yeah, we had a lesson. I don't know if you listened to the lesson yet on Rahu and Ketu dashas, but usually the first 6 years of the Rahu dasha through Rahu Saturn are very kind of confusing, and we don't know what the hell to do, and it takes a long time. And then things usually kind of fructify a little bit if there's going to be success in the Rahu period. It usually happens between Rahu Mercury and Rahu Venus, the middle section. And then things kind of, if we haven't completed a Rahu journey, then the last 6 years things fall apart again because Rahu and Mars, Sun and Moon are kind of enemies, and so those combinations. Once in a while, you can have great triumphs. Even Donald Trump, who became president at the end of his Rahu Mars period, he had because he had actually has a very strong Mars, and it's a really good planet for him. But a lot of people really kind of fall apart at the end of it. It depends. So there's no. The stereotype that we used to teach is that people always kind of have this kind of huge kind of Rahu meltdown at the end of the dasha, but it's not true of everybody. And in looking at other people, it's not true. I mean, I think Trump had, in Rahu Moon, I think he had to bankrupt a number of casinos. I mean, I always tell people, life is not that black and white. It's like not everything is good in our life and not everything is bad in our life at any one time. I mean, once in a while that happens in Vedic astrology, but not very often. Usually it's kind of mixed. Our health is good, our relationship sucks, our business is good, our children hate us, but it will vary from period to period. You can see it in the Varga charts,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not that cut and dry,
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Oh, good question. Any other comments? Um, okay. So now this section is something that I've kind of developed, and it's kind of I would still call it work in progress. And it's based on this book. I always have to stand on the shoulders of many great people, but and particularly there's a book by Lisa Bourbeau. She's a French woman. It was translated "Heal Your Wounds and Find Yourself," and it's kind of a fascinating book. I was reading it this week to put together this lesson. And so a lot of the points that I'm talking about are from her book, and I'm kind of what struck me about it when I was putting it together was that some of the things that she's talking about are connected to Rahu and Ketu in the when they're on the 1728 axis, and so that's why I wanted to bring it up because I thought it's kind of a deeper way of you can be very simplistic and talk about um, Rahu in the first or Ketu in the first and stuff like that, and you can say or you can be really deep, which is if you know me, I just like to get deep. I'm a Scorpio, so I went really deeply into this material because I'm kind of intrigued by wounds, and I was actually sometimes you can have all 5 wounds, and I was thinking, I'll show you my wife's chart. My wife has all 5 wounds, and and they usually start in childhood and your relationship with your mother and father, and then we develop these compensation patterns and these masks to kind of deal with them, and they're kind of interesting. So the 5 wounds are betrayals, rejection, abandonment, humiliation, and injustice, and they are all connected to kind of Rahu and Ketu. Sometimes, and again, I have to do a little bit more research on it. So the problem with researching famous people is that you don't always know their internal life unless they've written, a really detailed, reveal it all by autobiography. Maybe Shirley MacLaine or somebody has done that. I mean, some famous people do that, and then you kind of really know what they're really like inside, and you have to know their biographies and things like that. I wish I had Elton John's chart because I had it I have it on the other computer. Let's see if I can pull it up because I felt like from that movie that I got a real sense of his life. And see if it's on the other computer here. No. Okay. If somebody who has a free computer or or phone can look up his birth data on AstroDean. So for those of you who'd like to look up famous people, you go to astrodeans.com and you type in their name, and you usually get pretty accurate birth data there. I did have it, and I don't have it anymore. I don't know what happened to it. But anyway, I think it might be fun to look at his chart again later on, but we can do that in a little bit. So Lisa Bourbeau's whole premise is that we're often have these wounds from past lives, and we bring them in, and we attract parents that will kind of trigger those wounds, and then we attract situations in our life that will create these wounds later in our life, so that we can heal them. And so, if we have an abandonment wound, I have an abandonment wound because my mom somehow left me in the crib a lot and didn't hold me when I was little, and that was like, hugely traumatic. And obviously I chose her, to do that, and she was a good person. She was not a bad mom. She just did that. But then when she went away to work, I also felt abandoned, and I still deal with this wound. And then I even in my 60s now, I create situations in my life where I wouldn't say people abandon me. It's not like my wife has left me, but like it's happened at work a lot where people just don't show up, or they have their own crises and they leave. And this whole year has been about that. We're really good people that were with me with our company, just kind of, and it brought up my abandonment stuff to heal, and I did some healing work on it, and it's better. But so that's how this stuff kind of works. We have these wounds deep inside, maybe from past lives, and then they come up to be healed. So what happens is that if we have a wound, we often develop a mask to kind of deal with it, and the mask is a pattern that kind of allows us to kind of compensate for what's going on inside. So, for example, if you feel abandoned, you may be very dependent on being with other people, or you may be dependent on your wife, or being with other people. And I think I'm probably more self-sufficient now in later age, but I was very afraid of being alone for a while. That's why I got married. And my wife is very independent, and I can't say that I'm any longer dependent on her, but for a long time, I was very dependent on having her around, and emotionally, I would feel extremely distraught when she went away on a business trip, and so you can see this kind of issue in my chart with Rahu in the second house. But anyway, so there are these kind of wounds that we have, and then these masks that we develop. We'll go through these, and maybe you read the notes. So rejection is a core wound, and it usually appears the first 5 years of our life. And sometimes we've come here to kind of heal this wound. Often what happens with rejection is that people kind of withdraw. So let's say they were rejected. Rejection can be by a parent. Maybe the parent divorced them. Parent left them and they were, through a divorce. Maybe rejection happened because they ended up being an orphan. I think I have Steve Jobs' house, and he has he was kind of an orphan. He was adopted. And sometimes what happens with rejection is that kind of people end up kind of withdrawing. Sometimes children will create this imaginary world. They'll build castles in the air. They'll believe their parents were given the wrong baby at the hospital. They invent different means to escape from home. Sometimes they love going to school. They don't want to be home. And they withdraw into their own world because they feel rejected, and ultimately they're rejecting themselves. I think this is kind of true in the with Ketu and this Rahu in the 2-8 axis. They kind of admit that money is necessary, but doesn't make them happy. They have problems with their sexuality, and they think it interferes with their spirituality. So this kind of Ketu again tends to make one more spiritual, more withdrawn, and things like that. Very kind of typical of this kind of pattern. So sometimes people reject society because they're afraid of being rejected, and so it becomes they withdraw from society. Kind of also kind of a K2 in the first situation. They're afraid of getting out there, of being venturing into the Rahu pole in a sense. They tend to kind of feel powerless, and rather than do that, they kind of reject the world and withdraw. They want to become as invisible as possible, and it makes them believe that maybe they're safe this way. But deep down, they kind of feel like they don't have a right to exist. So it's kind of extreme self-deprecation. I mean, this would be extremely strong maybe if you had Ketu and Saturn in the first house together. Even Ketu, even Saturn in the first house, I think could create this. Just kind of extreme withdrawal. So K2 in the first, particularly creates this kind of feeling of being hopeless and worthless, and sometimes people compensate by kind of trying to be perfect so that everybody in the wise eyes of the world, doesn't see that that's how they feel about themselves. And my wife unfortunately has this pattern. Unfortunately she has all of these patterns. Where she's an outstanding person at work. I mean, she's like she does the work of like 10 people. She'll work. People will call her at 10 o'clock at night, and she'll help them. And she wants to be seen as perfect at work, so that people won't see how she really feels inside. And obviously, inside, there is a lot of deep problems. I'll show her your chart again. She's got K2 in the second. Okay, a Libra rising ruled by Venus. Venus is conjunct K2 again, so it's not that K2 is in the first here, but even K2 conjunct the first lord Venus, is like having K2 in the first because it's a very close conjunction. So it's kind of has that K2 in the first situation, and then she was the youngest child. She was unnoticed by her family, but she didn't feel like she had any value, and so she developed this pattern of like not having any worth, and she wasn't heard when she got into trouble when she was younger, and so she developed all these kind of really deep patterns. So people sometimes compensate by kind of when they reject themselves, they try to be perfect in the eyes of others, so that people won't see how they really feel about themselves. Withdrawals generally have very few friends at school or at work. They're considered to be loners, and they're generally left alone. They most isolate themselves and become invisible and withdrawn. Now that isn't true of my wife because she has Jupiter in the first. And I've mentioned she kind of, everybody loves her, but she still feels like she doesn't have any friends, and she's actually very isolated. So, here's a case where, absolutely everybody loves her in town, and they love spending time with her and stuff like that. But inside, she doesn't want to be with anybody, and she kind of stays home a lot. And again, it's like kind of that K2 energy kind of dominating there. Withdrawers can often develop skin problems if they don't want to be touched. And the skin is a contact organ. It either attracts or retains people. So people who develop acne sometimes, K2 in the first can have, are it's kind of an indication that maybe they're, having this kind of syndrome. They don't want to be seen. They don't want to be touched. There's extreme kind of self-hate there going on. If you take my class on Boudica, we're doing that in the Secrets of the Houses class. Ninth house Boudica doesn't want to be touched, and it's a problem. And I actually have that problem also. I need to be touched desperately, and I don't. I'm afraid to be touched. It's a very kind of difficult wound. Like I said, people become K2 in the first, Saturn in the first. People become very isolated. They live in their own world. They don't. They reject themselves, and they don't go out into the world because they don't want others to reject them. And this could also come up if you had a Ketu period in early childhood. I did have a Ketu period in my early childhood at age 7, and I used to go into the closet, and it was completely dark in there, and I wouldn't have any light in there, and I would just be in the closet, and I loved being kind of isolated alone in the closet. When I was very young in my Ketu period, it was kind of like my meditative cave, I guess. Um, um, and I wasn't like that when I was totally little. And I think my Ketu period started when I was 4, but I did have some tragedies even early in life too. Again, we also could have Ketu conjunct Sun or Moon or Mars. I think I'm moving to the humiliation section, which is a little bit different. So again, what happens when we're rejected is we withdraw from life. And so the antidote, obviously, is that you have to force people who are withdrawing in life and staying home all the time to get out and be with people. But they don't want to because they don't feel good about themselves inside. So it's really this catch-22. And ultimately, when we get to the end of the slideshow, we have to figure out how to heal all of these wounds. And one of them is you have to recognize them, and then you have to kind of do something about it. And it requires action. And, it's brave. I'm working with a man now who has kind of a Ketu in the first personality, and he's very withdrawn, and I have to really kind of encourage him to get out there. The more withdrawals reject themselves, the more afraid they're being rejected. So this, if you don't handle this problem, if you don't, if Ketu dominates and you don't move into Rahu, if you don't get out there, and again, Rahu is going into the forest and leaving the safety of home and your old patterns, then you never get through this. Okay, so 2 is rejection, which is similar. So let me go into rejection. So I'm sorry. Some of this material is I wanted to organize it a little bit better, and there's a lot of it. I wanted to go on to abandonment, but let's go back to rejection. So sometimes we feel rejected in childhood by a parent, and maybe our dad didn't. Often happens with the parent of the same sex. If we're male and our dad isn't around, or if he rejects us, or something like that, then we tend to withdraw, and suffer this kind of rejection syndrome. And again, the mask is withdrawing from the world because we've been rejected by a parent and we withdraw. People with this syndrome can go from deep love to deep hate. They don't believe that they have the right to exist. They feel hopeless and worthless. They feel withdrawn, and sometimes they have out of the body experiences. You get these, and this is like a typical Ketu in the first syndrome, where people, or Ketu conjunct the ascendant lord, where people have very kind of psychic intuitive experiences, and they're so kind of out there that they don't relate to the world because they're so. We learn that about Ketu. It tends to be very intuitive and sensitive, and sometimes too psychic, that it feels everything that's going on and it can't be part of the world. Okay, let's see. I have a few slides mixed up here, so I have to find out what happened. I was pasting things. So the next major wound is called abandonment, which is similar to rejection, but it's a little bit different. What and I mentioned abandonment earlier in the slideshow. I this was one of the ones that is strongest for me. But what happens when you feel abandoned is that you become too dependent on other people. So it's not the same as rejection, because rejection tends to withdraw from life and be totally a hermit. But abandonment tends to make people more dependent. Um, Little children seek attention by crying. They can't be alone. They're afraid of being alone, so they become dependent on their mother, or and then they become, and later on life become dependent on their spouse. And if their spouse leaves them or something, then they go through a kind of a crisis. Um, People go through great lengths when they're dependent to avoid being deserted, and so they'll do anything to make sure that they aren't deserted or abandoned. And um, they often become victims in these situations because they're seeking attention to make sure that they're not abandoned. People who get ill suddenly kind of get attention, and so it's kind of making sure they're not abandoned. Um, So abandonment happens in childhood sometimes if parents go to work every day and have very little time for them. And so this is kind of common. We have a latchkey society now where, I grew up in the 50s, and luckily my mom was home when I came home from school for maybe the first 6 years of my life. But as soon as she went back to work at age 7, I was kind of, I had a kind of a crisis around it. Um, but you can feel abandoned. And again, children aren't logical; they're just emotional, and so they don't understand that you're trying to make a lot of money so that they have all the things that they want, but they just want you. So it's a very kind of difficult situation. Um, Sometimes abandonment can happen. Sometimes a parent can go into the hospital for a long period of time, and I know my mom went into the hospital for a week or something. And I know it was very traumatic for me. And there are all kinds of ways that this can happen, and sometimes, um, it forces children to kind of create this mask. Um, Abandonment can happen if the father's too busy, if the mother's too busy. If children need a lot of attention, and I don't, you can talk with child psychologists, but at a certain age, they, they do want to become independent from mom and dad, usually about age 12. But up to a certain age, they're very dependent, and then they develop this whole abandonment thing if people aren't there. People who suffer abandonment don't feel sufficiently nourished with affection. So this is the story of my life, and I can't believe I'm 64 and I'm still dealing with this. And like I said, I've done enough work on myself. I know from family history that, I just was left in the crib a lot to cry and not held enough, and I wasn't breastfed. And these are just very kind of core things that are about early childhood development that, one of the child psychologists I studied with said that even up to age 6 or something, it's good for a child to actually sleep with the parents because it creates they need the physical contact. It develops a certain level of security in them, and and in modern society this doesn't happen. And people, early parents are much more aware of this than they were before. And I think even up to the age of 2, I think it's thought that you've seen these kind of papooses that mothers wear, and it's very important for early children to have continual contact, physical contact with the parent, up to a certain age. I know up age 6 is kind of a critical point, but I mean, you can't carry your son around in a papoose for, probably more than 2 years. But I think, I think there are ages where that's important. Diane, I'm gonna unmute you. I just saw that you came. Okay. So what happens is, to me, this abandonment dependency thing, is a very kind of Rahu in the seventh affliction. Rahu in the seventh craves relationship. Somebody has, Diane, you might have to unmute yourself. You have
I
to mute
did.
yourself.
I
Oh, okay.
did.
I'm going to mute you now because it's
Okay,
coming through. Okay.
that's
So you
fine.
can mute yourself. Good. Okay. So dependence. So to me, this when you have this abandonment issue, you develop this kind of Rahu in the seventh syndrome, which is that you're continually addicted to being in another relationship, which means that you bounce from one relationship to the next, and even if you get married, that relationship isn't enough, and you have affairs, and because you're continually dependent on others, and it's something that it's a real kind of, can be a real problem. There's a victimization pattern that often gets created with abandonment people, and they did that to me. I mean, one of my spiritual teachers was often saying, like, victimization is like swimming in the sewer water and enjoying it and telling everybody how much you enjoy it. And you meet people who get into blaming people a lot and into kind of making everybody the bad guy, and it's a very kind of immature situation because, and this develops out of this abandonment situation. They did that to me. No, you created it yourself. Okay. And the abandonment syndrome, there's a need to bond, there's a need for presence, attention, and above all, support. So again, at age 64, I'm still dealing with this issue of not being supported, and I've got to fix it this year. People with the abandonment syndrome have difficulty doing or deciding things alone, but they ask for advice, but they don't necessarily find it. I often find this with Libra rising too, because Jupiter owns the sixth, and they don't ever trust their guru, but they seek help, but they don't ever believe or trust the situation. Abandonment cries easily, attracts pity, one day happy, one day sad, physically hanging on to others, deeply in need of sex. I mean, Rahu in the seventh is, deeply in need of sex. They need the physical attention because they were abandoned. They need to feel connected, and so that's why it's important with young children to always give them a lot of physical touch so they don't feel that. There's this. If you read the book, she goes into this whole list of kind of eating habits that people with the abandonment system have, and it's very interesting. She's a very brilliant woman. Okay, the third wound is humiliation, and humiliation is defined as the lowering of one's pride, dignity, or self-respect. Synonyms for the word are embarrassment, mortification, shame, indignity, degradation, abasement. And the word can, this one can be awakened between ages 1 and 3. Again, a child may wet in his pants or in his bed, and then feels humiliated, and then the parent doesn't lets them know it's a bad thing. And you have to, obviously you have to toilet train your kids. But I was reading a story of a woman who was living in a convent, and I think she was young, she was 4 or something, and she wet in her bed, and the nun, made her carry wear the sheet of the wet bed into class. Just totally kind of made the situation worse. So you get these situations where, and then in modern days, you're at a big meeting of important people at work, and you spill a coffee cup all over the the important papers on the desk at an important law meeting, and of course that's, you're humiliated. So humiliation, can continue to come up later in life, and we sometimes create patterns around it. I said young children are often made to feel bad for bedwetting, getting dirty outside, or sexual energy. So they feel humiliated and ashamed, and this leads to this kind of wound being formed. So the mask of humiliation, which is the compensation pattern, is masochism. And I was really kind of trying to think about how this kind of shows up in astrology. And, Saturn aspecting the ascendant lord, or Saturn aspecting the first, is often kind of a masochist, because you're kind of always beating yourself up. And you may do it just inside, I'm wrong, I did this wrong, I'm a bad person, even though it may not, people ultimately sometimes you always think of masochism as some, where people kind of self-flogging themselves, but obviously masochism is just even the mind continually moving through itself, saying, I'm not good enough, I did that wrong, I'm not good enough, and I see that a lot with Saturn in the first house. And I always have to tell the people, you have to do a lot of self-esteem work with people like Jack Canfield, so that you develop this idea, I am enough, I love myself. It's a huge process to heal this. Sometimes masochism takes the form of people like just doing too much. They want to make themselves useful, so they want to be honored by other people around them, so they don't feel humiliated or put down. And again, this is kind of the masochist mask. So masochism is described as gaining satisfaction, even pleasure, from suffering. And I was actually listening to a piece on the BBC the other day about people who enjoy, and there's a German word for it, and I can't remember it now. Maybe somebody will remember it. People who enjoy the suffering of others. It's like pseudo-masochism. But in other words, we, when the hurricanes, wash away these towns, we're kind of gripped to the TV, kind of watching, all these people suffering. And, there's something kind of wrong about that. And it is kind of a form of masochism, deriving pleasure from other people's suffering. And I think it's an extension of this pattern. Masochists show themselves to be solid in control and very capable, because they don't want people to kind of see what they really feel like inside. They kind of, they go overboard. The example she uses is that sometimes your husband's mother becomes ill, and you spend all your time taking care of her and give up everything of yourself because you want to please your husband and your mother-in-law. And it's a masochistic tendency, because you're not taking care of yourself. And those of you who are familiar with Al-Anon and the whole dependent psychology that kind of goes through, is that when people become codependent, they, which is kind of a masochistic thing, they're so busy taking care of others that they don't take any care of themselves, and they eventually get sick and break down. And that's kind of part of, to me, that's also kind of a Ketu in the first situation with codependency. It's kind of self-masochism. It kind of has that kind of energy. Masochists, become codependents. They're always looking after each other, and the more they take on, the more they put on weight. And she says that masochists have a tendency to gain a lot of weight, and my wife has been overweight her entire life. Again, here's her chart. She's got Jupiter in the first. Again, Jupiter is a malefic for Libra. She struggled with her weight her whole type. Everybody loves Jupiter in the first. She's an incredible person. But in a sense, but she's also very codependent in that way. not with me, but she's very codependent in her work relationships. She wants to be perfect for everybody. She's the perfect administrator. Everybody comes to her in the middle of the night with their problems, and she helps them, and she doesn't want to ever show that she's imperfect in that way. Ketu in the second, I'm always finding it's like Ketu in the first and the second that you're getting these patterns coming up. Masochists find it hard to express their real needs or feelings because since childhood they never dared speak up for being ashamed or making someone else feel ashamed. Parents often are told that, sometimes this whole thing is about hiding shameful family secrets. Again, second house, Rahu and Ketu are filled with secrets. Rahu in the second or Ketu in the second. You have this kind of shameful situation at home, and you kind of cover it up, and it creates all these kind of patterns that hurt you later in life. Masochists are frequently appreciated for the ability to make others laugh by laughing at themselves. Again, that's self-deprecation, and it's another Ketu in the first, Saturn in the first kind of self-humiliation program that really is not useful. Masochists will sometimes attract people in their lives who embarrass themselves in public, like women who correct partners who are drunk, or women who attract husbands who are vulgar. They create situations. It's kind of a masochistic pattern because they're, creating a situation where they become humiliated. Again, the core source of this wound it comes from our inability to forgive ourselves for what we did to ourselves or what others did to us. It's difficult to forgive ourselves because most of the time we weren't aware. When we're little, we're just not. We're just in these patterns from sometimes in past lives, sometimes very little. It's very amazing. We blame ourselves for everything that we do to ourselves, so the healing with all these things is always about self-love, which we'll get to at the end of the talk. Okay, this is kind of a summary of the points that we just went through. Masochists obviously punish themselves because they're, before they get punished by others. Okay. Again, you can pick up the book if you're interested in this. It's very, very fascinating. So betrayal. Betrayal is the fourth wound. It's very common. We can get betrayed by a spouse that isn't faithful, that breaks a promise, who cheats with another woman. This comes up, even in adolescents' life when their boyfriends, cheat on them with another woman. It can happen in many other ways. Trust is always about Jupiter. Obviously, you need a strong Jupiter to prevent betrayal. And I think in my chart, this is the one that I really don't have. Luckily, I never feel betrayed. But I have Jupiter aspecting my nodes. I've got Jupiter conjunct Ketu, and I've got Jupiter opposing Rahu. So and I've got Rahu and Jupiter Sun. So Jupiter is protecting betrayal in my life, and it's not something that I luckily have experienced at all. Jupiter creates loyalty, and so obviously Saturn afflicting the nodes is going to create more betrayal. Or Mars. Mars is too adolescent, or even Mercury. So in childhood, if we promise our child we're going to do something and we don't do it, then it betrays trust. Sometimes extreme examples of betrayal occur, if there's an incestuous parents, which obviously becomes this huge secret. in anybody's life, and then the person is perpetually kind of working out that betrayal that came from a parent. So it's very kind of fascinating patterns that can happen. So we counteract betrayal with a mask of controlling. So it's a compensation pattern, and we do everything to show that we're strong and that we won't easily be taken advantage of. So it's kind of controlling energy is usually Mars. We talk about Kuja dosha in Vedic astrology. If you get Mars in the first, in this case it might be Mars connected to Rahu or Ketu, you get these kind of controlling patterns because controllers don't want to lose control, so they control everybody else. Saturn sometimes also has a secondary controlling influence. We particularly like to decide for others. Now, I have a controlling behavior, and because I have Mars in the first in my D9 chart, and I am trying to, I suspect there may be some wound from betrayal. I mean, we all have these childhood wounds. Maybe we don't think about them enough, but I have Mars in the first here in the D9 chart, and so I tend to have a controlling personality in relationship, which is not healthy. My wife somehow puts up with me. So controllers make sure they keep their promises and are faithful and responsible, and they make sure other people keep their commitments. And you meet people. I mean, sometimes this can be a good thing, I think, but it does get out of hand sometimes. Controllers are very talented and act very fast. They therefore have very little patience for people who are slower, and that's me to a fault. I'm Mars. I do everything really, really fast. When I have employees that can't go anywhere near as fast as I am, I'm really frustrated, and I'm always watching over them and kind of after them why they haven't gotten it done. So I definitely have a controlling pattern, which must mean I have a betrayal pattern. I have to really think about where that happens. Like I said, a lot of these are very common wounds, and it'd be interesting for people to share their experiences. Controllers find it hard to trust others and to delegate. Yeah, this is the story of my life at the moment now. I hire people, they don't do it right. I end up having to do it myself, and then at this point, I don't hire anybody because I don't trust anybody, and then I get overworked because I don't have anybody to support me. It's a really vicious pattern, and it's really not very good. Controllers consider themselves to be hard workers and responsible, and so they have problems with laziness. Okay, this is kind of Saturn. Also, that's when Mars and Saturn are very connected to the controlling pattern. That's me to a fault. Hard workers, responsible, can't handle laziness, but working myself to death now. Controllers like to get involved in other people's business. They quickly see everything that's going on around them, and they feel strongly that they can help these people and control them and make their lives better. So it becomes this kind of over taking care of people. And I was trying to kind of think how this kind of manifests with Rahu and Ketu. And I think I think it really would have to be a Rahu Ketu Mars connection, or a Rahu Ketu Saturn connection, or some combination. And I certainly have those in my chart. So I've got Rahu and Saturn aspecting my moon, and then Mars, Rahu and Saturn hemming in my moon, and then Mars aspecting my moon. And so I think my controlling personality, just is a strong combination of these three malefics kind of impacting the ascendant. While Mars aspecting his own sign is strong, and luckily that, gets me through the worst of the situation, but certainly it's kind of there. It's difficult to convince controllers of new ideas. They're generally skeptical. Now that's me to a fault. People are come to, they want to fix all my problems. I won't listen to anybody. I've got to figure it out myself. And so I'm controlling the situation. I won't let anybody in. I have to figure out. I probably was betrayed at age 4. I do remember the betrayal, but um, it's interesting that it really would have been that deep seated. This lady notes the majority of controllers develop the wound of abandonment before they develop the wound of betrayal. Those who decide when young not to accept their dependent side develop the necessary strength to hide their wound of abandonment. So this gets, if you're into pop psychology, you'll love this book. I'm probably doing overkill with it, but I just thought it was so key to these Rahu Ketu patterns that we've been talking about, and ultimately healing the wounds that need to come up.
Sorry to interrupt for a second, Barry. What's the name of the book?
I had it at the beginning of the slideshow. It's on page 2 of the slideshow. It's called.
I'll look later.
Yeah, it's under acknowledgments. It's either page 2 or 3 or 4 of my slideshow. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa Bourbeau, heal the 5 types of wounds, or heal. It's Lisa Bourbeau.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a very, very fascinating book. Because she kind of, I'm sure, like yourself, when you're going through this lecture I'm giving, you're saying, "Oh, I've got that." Yeah. I think these wounds are so core that sometimes you have all 5 of them, and they kind of intermingle very deeply, and like healing them is a huge thing. So betrayal sometimes happens with a parent of the opposite sex. There's a breach of trust, unfulfilled expectations, and the loss of sexual connection. Sometimes. Now, I'll tell you, I just hit on my betrayal. I was there's this little girl that I played with in my in my building, and we were like best friends, from age 4 when we moved in. And, we were really super close. And, I was, at 4-year-olds, you're just kind of in love with, in love as children, in a sense. And her mother, by the time I kept coming over to play with her by age 6, her mother was, didn't like the situation. I don't know what she didn't like. It's not healthy for 6-year-old boys to play with 4-year-old girls. I don't know, but she said that her daughter wasn't home, and I had seen that her daughter was home, and so it was like she lied to me because she didn't want me to play with her daughter, and I think it really broke my heart, and I'm just realizing. There was a betrayal that happened, there that was very kind of deep. Anyway, I just, as you know, I'm into sharing things. I don't. To me, it's about unveiling the mask because I want trying to be real and authentic, and I have wounds, and I'm sharing them with you because we all have them. So betrayal, I think, can be very connected if you have Rahu in the first or Rahu aspecting the first. And again, the mask is being the controller. The vocabulary that the betrayer uses is, "Let me do it by myself. I knew it. Trust me. I don't trust him. Do you understand?" I use all these words in my vocabulary. This is terrible. This is very scary. Betrayal, people want to believe they're responsible and strong, and so that's the compensation pattern. I'm responsible and strong. I'm deep inside I'm deeply wounded, but I'm responsible and strong on the outside. Impatient and tolerant. Very interesting. They don't confide in others easily. Certainly true. Okay. Okay. Injustice is the fine one. Now, injustice isn't just kind of like the thing I explained earlier in my 40s when this I did have an extreme experience of injustice when this company decided they were going to force this contract on me and take away all this money, and but injustice also has kind of deeper kind of values. It's that we don't. It's kind of like we don't feel respected. We don't believe we receive what we deserve. Those are kind of core words. Um, and sometimes if we don't feel good enough inside and we receive more than we deserve, it's very powerful. And again, you get K2 in the first. I'm not good enough. K2 in the second. There's not enough money. The family's not there. Rahu in the eighth. All this Rahu K2 first, second, eighth, seventh, eighth energy is up in this whole pattern. The origins of injustice, I call it the Saturn parent. We live out if our parents are critical, strict, intolerant, authoritarian, then they create a lot of suffering in their children, and this this is punishment, right? If I had now my mom wasn't like that at all, but I had a puritanical grandmother who was extremely strict and punishing, and she did a major number on me, which is why the compensation pattern for for injustice is rigidity, so sometimes we appear cold and dry and rigid in our attitudes. We criticize ourselves a great deal and we're very demanding and don't respect our limits. Each time we control ourselves in this way, we hold back and we're hard on ourselves. It's a sign that we're wearing the mask of rigidity. Ultimately, all these people, we have these patterns. We all obviously want to be loved, but we end up we expect a lot from others in return, even though we kind of hide in our strictness and concern. Rigid people are very sensitive, but they develop the capacity to bear their sensitivity and hide from others. They act as if nothing touches them. You meet people that are really cold. Now, this is a typical kind of Capricorn personality. Saturn in the first, Saturn aspecting the first, Saturn conjunct the moon, Saturn aspecting the ascendant lord. This kind of shows up, I think, more in Saturn than it does with Rahu. People tend to cross their arms more. They kind of block people out. They're just rigid. I'm not as rigid as I used to be, but I had a very rigid personality when I was in my 20s. Rigid people are very optimistic, which is very funny. They often say things like, "No problem, problems will go away." They're not. It's not realistic. They want to avoid. They do everything to avoid problems. Which is really kind of interesting. It's a way of kind of dealing with that pattern. Okay. I'm going to take a pause here. I'm coming back in a minute. Sometimes I have to do a quick emergency bathroom run, and it's good for you to do maybe a water break and rest your mind from all the stuff that I've been pouring into it too quickly. But I kind of see the rigid pattern very connected to Saturn-Rahu connection. So that could be Rahu and Capricorn, Rahu, Saturn conjunct Rahu, Saturn aspecting Rahu, that kind of thing. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. It's an interesting, rigid. Is everybody back? I'm going to give you a chance to. Okay, great. We're almost done. I just wanted to. Sometimes I'm amazed how intense sometimes these classes get. Okay, so rigid people, like those around them, know everything they've done and everything they still have to do. You meet people like this. My wife's a little bit like this. She just to tell me everything that she did that day and what she still has to do. And there's kind of this kind of Rahu Saturn workaholic energy, just obsession with being responsible, and it's just it gets a little bit too intense. Rahu Saturn. Um, rigid people's greatest fear is coldness. They have as much difficulty accepting their own coldness as they do accepting other people's coldness, and that's always interesting because we usually are hard on things that we do ourselves. So it's really kind of powerful. Again, with this kind of injustice situation, we have to perform and be perfect. And I certainly have a lot of that, and it blocks a lot of our own individual expression. Characteristics of the injustice syndrome: the perfectionist, envious, cut off from their feelings, over optimistic, lively, dynamic, have to justify everything that they do, and have difficult asking for help. The people with this pattern don't admit that they have problems. Greatest fear is coldness. Okay, so now we have to kind of finish this up. I want to hear from you and see what you've learned from this lesson too. Healing these ones, you can read the rest of the slides. Usually it always boils down to recognize that we have this pattern, taking off the mask and stop doing the compensation pattern. And it boils down to self-love. And all those things are hard to do, but you have to start by kind of, this lesson has been a little bit eye-opener for me. And are we really able to change ourselves and make these changes? I have healing technologies that I can employ now to kind of get rid of these patterns, but you can just see how how insidious they get. And it always boils down to kind of self-love, forgive, all those things that you learn in therapy, self-love and forgiveness and things like that. And I think just even recognizing what's happened. Unconditionally love is accepting even if you don't agree with understand the reason. So it's just, it's a huge process. Unfortunately, I can't heal all these things. She says there are 4 stages to healing. One is, certainly recognizing the process and the mask that you wear. Second of all, you have to, you feel resistance reading the chapters, and you'd rather accuse and blame others for your own suffering. And certainly we have to stop blaming others. It's always about, when we have problems, we have to kind of decide, that anybody who shows up in our life is a mirror of things that we're not looking at it. And rather making the other person's wrong, we have to look at ourselves and see what is going on and how can I stop my suffering. We're just attracting people who are mirroring what we have. The third stage is that, sometimes we have to heal the inner child, forgive the parent, feel compassionate for what happens. What happens is, we get into this whole blame game. We get caught up in these patterns, and we it's very easy just to blame the parent or blame somebody, and in the end we have to kind of, it's an ancestral pattern. Chances are your parents went through it and their parents went through it, and it just keeps kind of repeating. In the Varga 2 class, I had 3 or 4 lessons on ancestral healing, and it's quite profound because you're always dealing with, genetic stuff that you've taken on because your family has done this for generations. And you can see this in the D40 and the D45 charts. And again, the final stage of healing is loving yourself. And it's only in loving yourself and forgiving yourself that you can heal these things. Those are all kind of truisms. There are kind of things to do. Anyway, I want to hear from you, I'm certainly not going to go through your charts and say what patterns you have, but if you want to share anything that you've gained from this lesson or anything that you've thought about in your chart from this lesson, I would love to hear from you. If you want me to pull up your chart, I can, but I'm certainly not going to analyze your wounds looking at your charts, because it to me would be intrusive. Again, a lot of this has to be self-inquiry. You may not want to share, but I think it would be fun to hear from everybody. No volunteers. Okay, you're all in shock. Anybody? Okay, while you're thinking about it, what we learned from this lesson too is that we talked about this in healing Rahu and Ketu in that lesson is that with Rahu we have to be authentic. There's some phoniness, there's some part of us that people don't want to see. It's very interesting. I mean, just for those of you who've taken classes with me, I've always hidden behind the camera because I'm the kind of the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. I don't want to be seen, and that's Ketu. And I decided, okay, I've got to move to Rahu, so I'm on camera now. You can see me in all my imperfections. But that's part of a change of pattern that has to be made. You have to kind of change the way you do things. Diana, you have a question? You're unmuted.
Oh, you said that nobody wants to participate, so I thought that maybe, well, if you want somebody to participate, I can do it, but it's okay. Don't worry.
No, I'd like you to participate. I was just doing filler, waiting for somebody.
Okay.
Do you want me to bring up your?
Yeah. So you want me to share the issues in my chart, correct? From childhood.
Yeah. That you
well,
think relevant to this lesson? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I was not in the whole lesson, so I think I'm going to know what I see I have in my chart. I don't know if I'm hope that it will be tied to what I'm saying. I have Rahu in my second house, which create issues of I'm kind of the black sheep of the family in terms that I don't think the same way that my family, and that forced me that I have to rely on myself and do my own life, to do my own individuality, find my own individuality. And yes, I have no support from the family, which is okay. I think at the end it helped me to grow up and forced me to rely on myself. Rahu forces me that I have to work for my income harder because I have no support, and I think in the end it's a lesson. And Saturn in the fourth house create a lot of issues with the mother and happiness and home. I think because it's conjuncting my Mercury and is at the Amakarka with the AM together. Mercury gives me, I have some communication problems sometimes to communicate my emotions, but at the same time, I'm very analytical, I want to resolve things from a mental perspective and you understand things. So that helped me to make decisions at the end that were in my benefit. So I don't know if that helps.
Okay. Good. Thank you for sharing. Did you? I mean, you can reread the slides. Did you look at the betrayal, abandonment, injustice situations? Do any of those patterns resonate with you?
Yeah, might be. Yeah, I think in the past years I have felt that I have people that have betrayed me, or especially in relations. But I don't know. The thing is that the last few years my life has been much better. So, but yes, in the past years I have issues of betrayal. So.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you for sharing, Diana.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I can share. I'm a little overwhelmed by the things that you're sharing, because a lot of them really make me see my pattern of you know choices and everything.
Okay, thank you. So what did you learn?
So I don't even I don't have the first house and second house. I guess because my second house is ruled by Venus and Venus conjunct K2. So that where the
It
because
could come up that way. That's yeah. I'm glad you saw that because it's like when I pointed out in the first slide is that there's so many different ways. These patterns are so kind of basic, and so they have to be someplace in the chart, and they can come up. Second house is early childhood and family, and so when you have K2 conjunct the second lord, like my wife does too, yeah, it can bring up some of those patterns. Yeah. Good.
Okay, so I have noticed that myself being just like your wife, always trying to do everything for others, to please others, to reach that standard, set others' expectations, and especially being a masochist. I have experienced that with my own relationships, and I always choose very self-absorbing or self-centered partners. So then I become the giver and nonstop giving, and eventually, of course, resentments build up, and that's very unhealthy. But now I'm realizing why. My father, my parents were divorced when I was very young, and both of my parents are very Saturnian. Was very authoritarian, very, just very high standards, and that pushed me to succeed in many ways. But yeah, it also, hurt me in other ways. Just like you said, all the slides that you showed, it just, I was looking at myself in many of them.
Yeah, I know. It's a real eye opener, isn't it?
Yes. Because you don't know how your subconsciousness work, and I question myself that the reason that I would choose partners that are so opposite from myself, that why would I do that? When somebody is like myself, that's giving and generous, I'm not attracted. I try to figure this out for a long time, and now I'm so happy that this lesson really probably is the beginning of my healing journey.
Oh, good. I'm so happy. That's why I did it. I was trying to I'm trying to get out of the box here a little bit. I mean, you won't find this in any books, but it was kind of like I was taking what Lisa was saying, and I was thinking about Jyotish, and I was saying, how can we put this together to kind of heal Rahu and Ketu? And so, like I said, this is work in progress for me because I think the more I'll look at it now, the more I will see it in different ways. But yeah, it's very powerful. Wow.
So what do you think with my D9 chart with Mars, Rahu in fourth there that
Yeah,
indicate?
I was just thinking. Usually there are sometimes health problems with Mars, Rahu in the fourth house is one of these vulnerable places in the D9 for health issues. Now it would come up in a Mars Rahu period, but you've been through that already. So
No, I haven't reached Mars, Rahu Mars yet. Rahu Mars, no. But Mars,
okay,
Rahu.
yeah, so Rahu Mars could bring it up at the end of the Rahu period, but Mars Rahu could have brought it up at age 25, 26. I don't know if you had any health issues.
No, I didn't.
Okay, good, because you were young. Okay, so it could come up. I have to think about. Rahu Mars. The fourth house is also one of the kind of the houses of domesticity. And you've got Rahu in the fourth in your again, the fourth house is the house of happiness and domestic happiness and marital happiness. And you've got Rahu there, who is never going to be satisfied with marital happiness with Rahu in the fourth. And then it kind of repeats because it's also in the fourth house with in the D9. And with Mars, it tends to get kind of like furious. Rahu Mars kind of breaks out into kind of furious emotional tirades at some point. When marital happiness and harmony aren't there.
Yeah, my mother has a fierce temper. I mean, she's totally a Martian type of woman.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anything else you want to share, Jessica? Thank you for sharing.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
okay. Anybody else? Catherine. Catherine can't get on the phone because. And then Julie, I got you unmuted again, Julie. I don't know if you. Sometimes I know you're on the phone and you can't get on to speak. You always have such wonderful insight. So I don't know if you have anything to share. And if not, it's okay. Uh, okay, so this lesson is kind of work in progress. I sometimes, I don't teach you Parashari Jyotish. I'm always trying to kind of modernize Jyotish and make it practical. So this is, and one of the reasons I actually even veered away from the Nakshatra lesson was I just thought it was going to be too kind of boring. But I'm always, I think, for those of you who've gone through, 19 weeks now of Rahu and Ketu, we have to get to this cathartic synthesis of being able to kind of heal our subconscious patterns about Rahu and Ketu, and which means we've got to open up these ugly wounds and look at them, and when we have to do something about them. And it's not, if we don't, then we end up, suffering. So um, that's my goal in kind of putting together these final lessons, is to kind of reopen more healing to take place so that we really understand what Rahu and Ketu are about, and it's not just Rahu and this nakshatra and this kind of thing. So at some point in 2 weeks, we have to put it all together with the cookbook, which I come up with these cookbooks, which is summarizing the whole course. So we'll do that. Next week, I'm inclined to do a whole lesson on Rahu and Ketu and relationship. And again, it's work in progress. It's not something that I've even studied, but it's something that I want to develop because I think it's very core, and I think we can't ignore it. And it does show up a lot in people's charts all the time. I think Rahu and Ketu relationship usually shows up as codependent dependent patterns. Rahu in the first is so self-absorbed that they want to be the center of attention, and they can't contribute to the relationship. And Ketu in the seventh usually is the dependent person who supports the rock star and stuff like that. But there's a lot more pattern to the whole thing, and I was hoping what we'll do next week. So final Jeopardy question answer. If you're a Jyotish junkie, you can join me at 3:30 for Secrets of Life, Purpose, and Career, which is an overview of our upcoming class. Even for those of you who studied career with me in the Varga class, I'm taking it to another level because we're going to do 14 lessons, and we're going to do 7 or 8 lessons on Jaimini astrology and some of the Jaimini charts and the Akarka. So I'm expanding my Rahu boundaries in this new class coming up. So and I've got to get ready for it and regroup, but I will see you all next week. Have a great week, and take care.
Thank you, Barry.
You're welcome.